I'd love for my panelists to join me on stage. And as they're joining on stage, I definitely want to kind of set the tone for this conversation. I know that when signing up for this course, not this course, but looking on the itinerary and deciding whether or not to join this session, it didn't have a lot of preamble about what this is really concerning. So this is really around the concept of trust. And as you know, trust has always been an essential component of commerce. And in today's environment, it is the quintessential, most critical currency by which companies have to engage customers in exchange for their loyalty, their attention, and their business. And when we're thinking about how organizations are doing in terms of building trust, we're seeing the highest level of trust with customers, employees, suppliers, investors, requiring a new and more comprehensive way of thinking about engaging customers. In the complex and evolving factors of what business is looking like today, we're seeing digital products become susceptible to online harm, privacy invasion, hacking, things of that nature. So when we're talking about trust, we define it as the earned confidence and reliance on digital platform assets, digital products and services. And this is achieved through transparent and integrity-driven data practices, the ability to protect and proactively prevent online harms and abuse, as well as measurable privacy, security, and safety protocols and safeguards. So I wanted to provide that context in terms of like, why are we having this conversation? And before we get started, I would love to just introduce myself. My name is Tanneasha Gordon. I'm a principal partner at Deloitte. I lead our US data and digital trust business. And super excited to have this conversation. Within that practice, we do everything from data governance, data privacy, data security, product engineering, privacy engineering, and things of that nature. And I'm super excited to have my esteemed and awesome panelists here today. And I'd love for you ladies to introduce yourselves and maybe give us one of your most trusted applications or products that you use today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Safiya Miller, and I've been with Microsoft for almost a decade now. I lead a strategic accounts team where we own the relationships on my team for Adobe, PayPal, and Veritas. It's an exciting time to be in the industry, specifically at Microsoft, and I'd have to say my most trusted product. Am I putting some on my Microsoft cap with Everything Copilot?
Of course, you're going to promote.
Right. Well, I'll say personally, I'm definitely an iPhone fanatic, and the closed iPhone ecosystem definitely makes me feel secure with their product set. From a Copilot perspective from Microsoft, I would say probably my favorite product is Microsoft 365 Copilot, just because I use it in everything I do to stay productive at work. And it's built with the most comprehensive security stack in its outline and foundation. So those would be the two.
Awesome. How about you, Heather?
Yeah, hi, my name's Heather Ratcliffe. So I'm co-founder of Black Women in STEM, but also I've worked over 2 decades in the tech field, leading up and building out compliance teams, privacy programs and offices, and cybersecurity organizations. And so I'm just excited to be here to couple my passion work and putting that with my industry experience and be able to speak from a lens of trust by design and why it's important to have an inclusive lens to that. And so as I think about, most trusted applications, what is that, zero trust? But no, but really in my mind, I think of WhatsApp. It's a tool I use all the time, the end-to-end encryption feature. Again, there's numerous advantages of having that and being able to encrypt your chats and your calls and your messages. While there also are some disadvantages, I would say nothing's 100%, and that would be my go-to app as I travel.
No, thank you for that. So when we're saying trust by design, I want you all to think about it as the amalgamation of all of the design principles that you need to think about when designing and developing a product. So think about your privacy review process, your inclusion. I heard you spoke about inclusive design, so your inclusion review process, any responsible AI review process you have in your organization, your security review process. So it's the amalgamation of all of these disciplines come together to ensure that the products that you're designing and releasing are trustworthy, are responsible, are reliable, and aren't creating unnecessary harm or impact to the end users. So that's what we're talking about today. So as we go into trust by design, maybe tell us a little bit about your experience building trust with customers and supporting product teams from whether it's a privacy review perspective, security review, or just overall what customers are demanding from a trust point of view.
I don't mind kicking that off. The industry is changing quite a bit. You think about consumers are getting more educated about what information is being used about them. We're in a state of globally, there's more regulations that are being pushed to think through privacy and the use of data. And so I think it's a call to action for companies now to really be able to say, trust and privacy is a part of our value statement. It's a part of what differentiates us. It's our competitive advantage. And never before, I was talking to one of my older aunts, and she was like, why am I getting so many emails and mail with these privacy notices, and what does this mean to me? And I was like, do you read them? More than anything, it's important that you understand, for the companies you're working with, whether they're subscription-based or whatever, they're collecting data about you, and how is that data being used? And there are rights you have around that. And so now you see more and more companies coming up with strategies around privacy and how they want that to be a consumer-centric strategy. Putting the consumer at the center, giving them choices, letting the consumer know that they have rights to act upon. And so I think more than ever, you're seeing where notice and consent is becoming top priorities for companies to think about. It's a part of building their brand trust. Also in an era where so many data breaches are happening and you're not sure, was my data exposed? What do I do if my data is exposed? It's important that companies can share how they're collecting that data. And so I think this is just becoming embedded as a corporate priority for companies these days to have a brand strategy that includes privacy, trust, and security.
How about yourself?
Yeah, so building on that lens a little bit, so when I think through trust by design and how we think about that from a Microsoft perspective, trust is earned, it's not given. So similar to what you said, we believe in the zero trust mentality, right? So there is no assumed trust no matter what level of the organization you sit in, no matter what client or customer that we've interacted with over the years. So when we think about design of trust, we're thinking about how do our core values connect to our customers? And we continuously think through how do we continue to iterate and think through shared responsibility of trust and of design. So we wholly believe in a shared responsibility model when we think through trust. And then from a deployment perspective, particularly around all of the work that's going on with AI, we encourage and make sure that we clarify with our customers, your data is your data. Your data is not being used to train underlying models, right? And just continuing to be as transparent as possible and going back and inclusive as possible. And we're on the forefront of guiding what does that ethical responsibility look like from all of the agents that are in this ecosystem. So it's something that's currently at work, currently at play, currently be designed, which is really honestly makes it exciting to be working at this day and age right now because we're designing something that's never been touched.
Right, right. And in some of my experiences helping, product teams think through privacy or security, sometimes it tends to be like very siloed. So they'd be more mature in the security engineering and a little bit lax on the privacy side, or haven't even thought about the inclusion side, or like how do we ensure that bias isn't prevalent on our platform, or how do we design products so that it's not abused or proliferating hate speech or misinformation. And in those experiences, what I found was that the driver ends up being, regulatory or, brand impact. What are some of the drivers you're seeing from a B2B perspective? Safiya, I'll start with you, and then you, Heather, from a B2C perspective, that are driving companies and products, teams to start thinking more holistically about embedding trust?
Yeah, well, how many of us actually go into the office to work 5 days a week in the audience? Okay, it's about 10%. What about 3 to 4 days a week? Okay, about 5. And then who is pretty much remote? Okay, all right, so now if you ask that question right after the pandemic, everyone was doubling down that we'd be back into the office. So the biggest shift is that hybrid work is here to stay. Hybrid work means that there are more broad touch points for bad agents to infiltrate our systems and our processes and our tools. So if anything, what, this trust debt, so to speak, that a lot of companies have, right? They, 30 years plus of just archaic systems and designs. I mean, I'm guilty myself. I'm paying lots of providers to save my data because I'm scared that I'm going to lose something. And, there's so much rationalization that can still happen. So I would say, again, one big shift is hybrid, and that's causing us to have to really think through how we think through those larger data sets and tools that we've had established for a long time, and then those newer tools that are in our ecosystems, which then means we have a plethora of security partners that we're using to keep our ecosystem safe, which means there's more stakeholders to manage, right? And there's more ideas that come in on how you think through managing those systems and those updates. So I would say that's the biggest one. The second biggest shift that we're seeing and continue to see is through multi-cloud adoption, right? So, which is great, because you want to keep all of your partners and providers on their toes, and I think that drives more accountability amongst a lot of the big players in the field, but that also draws tension internally, because some people are really passionate about which cloud providers they want to work with and which tools they have in their toolbox. So how does that work in a larger ecosystem that tries to empower the end user, the end employee, to come and bring their best self to work, which might be bringing your own tool set and baggage to work as well. And then I'll say the third piece, which we know now, is that AI has made pretty much touching tech ubiquitous, because now kind of the ordinary everyday user is getting a feel of what AI can really do to change their lives through ChatGPT predominantly.
And do you feel like your business customers are demanding more from you all, from Microsoft, from a security, privacy, and just overall trust perspective, in order for them to either demonstrate compliance or just demonstrate like safety and safe storage or secure storage of data in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely demanding more. I mean, to me, it's reminding me of the influx of all of the angst that came around when GDPR came out, and everyone's trying to get it right. And like, what are you guys doing to make sure that your product terms are up to date? What are you changing? How are you thinking about empowering us to achieve more, but also protecting us and what products we use and have to depend on for you to scale our own businesses? So now that's only scaled even more with Microsoft's own tool sets, particularly around AI, and then also building on top of AI with OpenAI on Azure. So I would say the demand is there, the responsibility is there, and one thing that Microsoft has done that I think other companies are going to continue to follow suit is our copyright commitment, particularly around Copilot. So anything that is purchased from a commercial perspective, if a third party tries to sue you for IP infringement, if you have a commercial usage and license of our Copilots and our Azure OpenAI services, Microsoft will defend monetarily and legally, as long as you've used our parameters and tools that we put in place and how you use those tools, they will come to your defense. Yeah. So we're answering the call where we can, but there's always opportunities to learn and grow.
No, that's exciting to know. And that's how you engender trust as well, right? With bigger corporations that don't want to be in any endless litigation around IP infringement. So Heather, how about yourself from like a B2C perspective? What signals are you seeing from the consumer side or the user side that's driving the need to like really forcefully push this idea of trust?
You know what? You can't ignore it. Generative AI. I mean, as we think about where we're going from the fourth to the fifth revolution of technology, and where now is open and available to consumers, it's important to understand that technology, the underlining foundational models that are associated with that. And then again, I'm going to bring that lens of understanding, do we have inclusive data sets around that? So as you think about large language models, again, taking data, whether scraping through the web or whatever, there is a need now to make sure before consumers are touching this and having consumer-oriented use cases towards this, that we're understanding the data. Is the data being built in with bias? Is the data being built in with discriminatory factors with it? Those are all things we need to consider. Some of the things I think about is in 2024 alone, 75% of democratic countries will be going through elections this year.
Yep.
So think about those large language models. Think about hate speech that could be misinformation, integrity issues, safety. So these are all things like top of mind for me that touch the consumer. So again, I think we're in a space where we have to make sure the tech is not happening to us, but that we're a part of that. And I think being a part of that is creating spaces where you have inclusive and diverse workforces training these models, making sure to understand the data that's going into them. So,
Just on that,
Yeah.
you know, I love that you brought that up and the unique year that we're in right now. And
You
we
might-
know we're
Mike.
in a time where, oh, sorry, yeah. We know we're in a time right now, specifically in 2024, with the amount of elections going on, but also we're seeing already just a week into the year, just the attack on the blatant truth and the role that media is going to have in coming to the forefront and how we think through what we're consuming from a technology perspective, what we roll over in the morning and read, and what do we actually do to bring our own agency as human individuals to the table to think through what we trust and what we're thinking through as well. So it's an interesting time that we're living in for sure.
definitely. I mean, societal factors now have to be a part of tech. If you think about that Venn diagram, you can no longer isolate tech from other factors of society factors, and I think it's important that we share this knowledge so that we have one recognition around it and can also come together as a tech community to solve for this together.
No, I think that's right. And I predict that what you will start seeing is that a lot of privacy organizations or security organizations or inclusion or organizations or even integrity or trust and safety already has the word trust in its organization, that you'll start to see a rebranding by either big brands or within the companies. They'll start rebranding what they do as fostering trust, because we see that trust also have an economic impact on valuation, how regulators engage with a company, how users use a product and engage with the company as well. And all of this is impactful to the bottom line. So, what I'm predicting is that you're going to start seeing a lot of brands and companies start pushing this concept of trust. And especially, I'm glad you brought up the whole generative AI. Like, how can you trust these models? Can you trust the data that's coming out? You brought up the media. Can you trust the media that's coming out? And when you're using your social media platforms, are those social media platforms hiring and outsourcing fact checkers, right? So I think we're going to enter a digital, I call it a digital trust age, where we really have to be laser focused on what safeguards and controls and tangible components are associated with this asset, this product, that allows me to trust that the information that I'm getting is trustworthy. For me to trust that my child can use this device without being bullied or, groomed for something. How can I trust that, from a psychological perspective, like we're safe using this device, or that my data won't be misused or mishandled? So I think that's why this conversation is also paramount because of the age that we're entering in, moving forward with some of the evolution of these technologies. I know we just touched on Gen AI a little bit. I don't know if you wanted to speak about, you talked about Copilot, you talked about some of the thinking and the trustworthy AI concepts and frameworks, but maybe talk a little bit more on how does Microsoft think about building and designing and deploying trustworthy AI solutions or products?
So I'll do it from two lines. I'll do it from Microsoft and then just some observations. So, when we think about generative AI, I think we have to take a step back because AI and the work that we've been doing has been happening for a long time. So from 2017, we've been thinking through shared AI principles, shared responsibility principles, and what does that mean to lay our foundation and how we think through building out our ecosystem. And our partnership with OpenAI, we had our first investment in 2019. And like I said, I've been in the business for over a decade now. And, when we think about our customers at Microsoft, we definitely have a partner-centric focus, meaning that we build with, we sell to, and we sell with our customers. So the OpenAI partnership, I felt like, it's kind of a natural coming together of two forces that have made both companies stronger and for the better. With that lens and thinking through it, there is still opportunity for growth on how we actually shape what this means for the universe and how do we make sure that we are bringing good human actors to the table with the role that we have right now. So for Copilot specifically, we think about our AI Copilot or anything Copilot as your AI companion or buddy. So Copilot is really supposed to be, ideally touching you from every web interface, every device interface, going all the way to any apps that you use when you're in work. And ideally, it is making your experience easier to use. Our products and also the tools and products that you build on top of our ecosystem more valuable. And one thing that we're really passionate about on driving down is digital debt. And what that means is, think through the amount of emails that you went through this morning, right? Before you even got to, I say input and output. Like, what did you actually get to output before you ingested all of these things coming at you? And ideally, what we're doing in regenerative AI, specifically around Microsoft 365 Copilot, is helping people reduce the digital debt they bring and they consume and work every single day so that they can do more of the things that bring that higher level human leadership, that thought leadership, that creativity to the table to drive new innovation. So our long-term goal is how do we do more to anchor on our mission, which our mission is to empower each individual and organization on the planet to do more, to achieve more. How do we empower those individuals and those organizations to do that? We reduce your digital debt so that you can be free to do whatever amazing goal that you're going after in your business. From a personal perspective, I'm just coming back from maternity leave. I just had my third daughter, Zia, and I'm excited to be coming back from leave and being here on the stage. And I was reading an op-ed that Elizabeth Spears put up in the New York Times this morning, and it was her thoughts on what does AI mean? Mm-hmm. And she said, you know what? It reminds her of a toddler. And I was like, okay. I have toddler twins, Zuri and Zyla, and then I have my newborn, Zia, who's 4 months. And what that made me think of is, you know what? For some people, this does seem nascent and new, right? Like they've never touched this because they are blue-collar workers, or they're not they're frontline workers. They're not using the tech day-to-day in and out like we've been using, those of us that have grown up in the industry. But we're definitely past that, right? So we're at this toddler stage where there's a lot of great curiosity. There's empathy, but who are the adults in the room that are monitoring and thinking through, hey, how do we teach? How do we empower? How do we embolden people to do more? And as anybody that has children, there's a variety of ways on how we teach our children, right? Do you do the Montessori approach? Do we child-led? Do we do gentle parenting? I mean, you name it. There's so many different things out there, and I think that's where we're in right now. There's so many well-meaning, I think, intentioned people, but there's so many diverse ways to approach how you think through how are we gonna put guardrails, safety, trust around this to make it something that does more good than harm to our next generation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And just following the toddler analogy, it's kind of like a parent just saw their toddler can read, and they're like, oh my God, I gotta get them. Like, I gotta show them everything. I gotta show them everyone, introduce them to everyone. And that makes me think about like how venture capital is working right now. You know, because of the inflationary environment that we're in, capital has been kind of constrained in terms of VC funding new startups, and startups are having to show more of a true revenue. Before it would just be, oh, how many users, monthly active users you have or yearly active users you have. But now what we're seeing is like a lot of venture capital is going into AI. And there's just so many, like every startup is just gonna put like, oh, we do AI in some form or fashion. And we're seeing a lot of investment, you know, moving just to startups that are investing in AI, but to your point, who's putting the guardrail, who actually has the muscle? And back to your point around data, I think what we might see over time is that a lot of money just gets placed into these startups and only a few survive. And then those will either be bought by the bigger tech companies that actually have the data to train these models, because it's one thing to have the model. If you have the model, another big tech company can go and have literally an AI model build a new, more sophisticated model. So it's really going to fall on which companies and which organizations have the plethora of data to train these models and make them more sophisticated. So I definitely see it's kind of like this toddler and just running around causing havoc and just taking all the funding away from other startups that may not be AI centric. But I think over time that may also teeter out and unfortunately get consolidated by these other companies that have the data to make those models useful. And we may also see more democratization of these models as well.
Yeah, I want to just add on to that too. I think it's important to understand that the investment is huge to get into generative AI. The computing power required, the GPUs. These startups are not going to have that.
Right.
These big tech companies are going to, and so even more reason where, you know, I'm a proponent of the voice of the consumer. They have power in what's happening, but it's important we understand. I know the buzzword is around Gen AI right now, just like it was around digital transformation years ago. But we need to understand, why are we jumping into this? Do we really have the use cases to support it? And then let's just go back to the basics. Data governance is going to become more important than ever. These now become just table stake things you have to have in your company. Data management, how you govern your data, good practices and policies around privacy in place, and then also risk assessment. We're in a new era. Do we understand how to identify and assess risk associated with these models, especially with the number of open models that are happening right now? You know, I'm not naming any company, but we're knowing there's certain models out there, the Lion one, where CSAM factors you have to worry about. How are we protecting our youth around that? And so as companies are thinking about the revenue and what's a part of and what is all possible with Gen AI, there is always, I think, a human factor that we have to keep at the center. It cannot be marginalized. And so, again, whether it's ethical data practices, whether it's integrating trust by design with privacy and security through purple teaming, a lot of companies are moving in that direction. Those are all considerations that need to be at the forefront of this.
No, absolutely.
Just on that note, I love that you brought up the reality of what it takes to play, and it's the pay-to-play market, because the amount of compute needed, the amount of actual like data storage needed, then to build on it it knocks half of the people out of the game to truly have a voice on how we're shaping this. So to your point on one of the most important principles in Trust by Design, inclusiveness, how are you truly being inclusive if it takes so much to actually have a stake at the table, which means that you have to be even more conscious of who you're bringing to the table from a class perspective, from an age perspective, from a gender perspective, and how we shape these narratives, because by design, it's not inclusive.
No, absolutely. And I think as users and consumers, you should be demanding this from brands and companies as well, because if you're not demanding it, they're not going to be thinking about it. So I do have one more question, but wanted to see if you all would want to join the conversation, if anyone had questions they wanted to ask. Awesome. I can't read your, I'm wearing my, oh, Stuart. Stuart.
Hello, and thank you for this panel because it's really timely. Heather started off by mentioning WhatsApp is one of her favorite applications, and it triggered this question. Designing things for, I want to make sure I get that right here, privacy and cybersecurity has to be, I think, in the eye of the consumer, not also compromising the basic use of the product. Right. And the reason why I'm triggered on WhatsApp is they've always been encrypted from end to end, which is terrific. But they recently added a feature where when you make a voice call, instead of going directly peer-to-peer, you now have to go through their, well, you don't have to, but you have the option of going through their meeting point server, which adds a much longer path, reduces the quality of the voice component, and even though it does anonymize the IP address, which is a feature, it's coming at the expense of the performance of the product. And I've seen that as companies have introduced two-factor and a variety of other things that just make it very inconvenient to use. So how do you achieve the balance between getting trust and cybersecurity without compromising the use of the product?
That is a great question. I think companies are going to have to look at trade-offs. And I think it's going to be a test and learn environment too, to be honest with you. And sometimes at the expense of the customer, where possibly before this rolled out, they didn't realize how the degradation of performance would be to a consumer. But, you know, I'm positive in the industry right now. I'm pretty sure Meta's looking at those factors. How do we get that next set of feature out to improve that quality? But I think these are the new issues companies are taking on of, I need to meet this high bar of quality, privacy. Regulation is pushing me in that direction, especially in the EU with a number of things happening in that space. But at the same time, I still need to have those product principles of building for the consumer. And so there's no perfect answer for this. I think it's going to be a lot of, we've got to figure this thing out as we go along and understand the trade-offs as we roll things out.
Yeah, there's a constant back and forth trade-off, and I think that was an excellent question. And even knowing that product really well myself, I know that even with the end-to-end encryption, that was a challenge for some EU regulators. Why? Because when there's so much child safety issues and exploitation, trafficking that happens, and if communications are encrypted, then law enforcement can't go and find those bad actors. But again, we want to protect private communication in terms of what, you know, WhatsApp, the founders may have been thinking, like, we want to protect communication. We want you to have private way of just engaging with people in your network. But the trade-off is that law enforcement and governments are not able to find traffickers and find, you know, child exploitive information. So that may also be why that new feature, when it's voice, they're like, okay, we can filter it through our trust and safety, our integrity filters to make sure nothing is happening. But then it's at the expense of you getting high quality or low quality voice notes, right? Any other questions?
Thank you. I'm really interested in a very high-level trust question, which is, I mean, generative AI is here, you know. The youth are using it, everyone's using it. As a head of an association, we're looking to employ Copilot as soon as possible just because it's so helpful. But realistically speaking, in all of this space, how can you really trust the output? What do we as the consumers know and understand about the underlying data that trains the systems, that gives us the output, what the information is scraping and beyond? I mean, just as if, for example, I just for amusement, you know, asked, I think it was Bard, you know, write me a 2-paragraph bio of me. And, you know, it went through, and for about 80% of it, it was fine. And then it went into absolute lunacy. And so the hallucination was extreme, which is fine. I knew it was incorrect. I could look at it. But literally, if someone, not that anyone wants to write a bio of me, but if someone was doing for research, you know, how is it that we're trusting the output? How are we, I think, thinking critically, or what kind of fact-checking? And for the companies who are developing and employing these tools, how do you think about that? I mean, a very high level of trust for that which we are using is going to be, in fact, good and useful. Thank you.
question, Whitney. Excellent question. An old security adage is, trust but verify. And I think we can't, just because, generative AI is just so transformative, we can't just rely on it. We need to just see it as a supporting tool, like a sidekick. I mean, we should really say sidekick, but as a co-pilot, as a sidekick. But yeah, you have to trust but verify. And I think within the development process, this is where you need to ensure that the data that's training these models are diverse, that there are mechanisms and safeguards in place to go back and fine-tune these models, and that there is a feedback loop where if hallucination is happening, or if the output of a prompt is generating abusive or misinformation, like that feedback loop is then sent back to the tech companies so that they can fine-tune the models, right? But that goes back to trust by design. You need to have those mechanisms in place to allow for that feedback loop. But I'm interested in knowing, what your thoughts are in terms of how do we educate consumers to know that trust needs to be verified on their end, but also like what are some of the additional mechanisms that could be embedded in these products to enable more trustworthy information that flows through it?
Thank you for the question. So from a Microsoft perspective, when we think through trust by design, similar to what Tanneasha said, it's definitely a trust but verify approach, meaning the shared responsibility is huge. And a large part of that is on the inputs. So to your point on the outputs, there is an expectation that what you're inputting is something that you have own and copyright, ability to actually put into the tool and the system. And to this other extent, it's also brings me back to my theory of knowledge class from way back when my professor asked, how do you know what you know? Right? And you have to still bring that mindset to the table. And that's why I brought up that point about the unique time that we're in on the attack on the truth is just going to only explode. So we have to bring that critical mindset to the table. And for those people that are scared of AI taking, away all the jobs, hey, critical thinking, humans need to do critical thinking to make sure that this trust component, the outputs, are indeed giving us factual information. So we still have a long way to go in that regard. But I would say the biggest piece that, from a Microsoft perspective, is the shared responsibility piece and what the input is being driven by the end user. So we're hoping our consumers bring that to the table as well. And then from a voice of the customer perspective, we have customer councils, and before we went GA with Copilot, we definitely got a lot of feedback from early users on what that experience looks like, and we continue to drive for that feedback as well, because we're only what our consumers and our customers bring to the table, only better by what they share with us.
I think just to piggyback off of that, I think one thing to definitely keep in mind is that I think sometimes we hear about these technologies and we may have a certain concept in our mind of like it's the all-being, all-knowing kind of tech. But at the very foundational level, generative AI is literally just a predictive tool. It's able to predict what's the next best word, right? We always had AI. Like when you do Google search, your RSS feed, like your feed on your recommender systems on YouTube, those are all AI driven. That was more deterministic. Generative AI is probabilistic, and what it is doing is that it's learned the human language so well that it's predicting what's the next best thing. It's not general intelligence, which is a whole nother area of machine learning that some technologists want us to stay away from, because that's kind of moving into like the singularity thought of like, what if machines become conscious? That's general intelligence, but what we're talking about today is just generative AI. And if you think about what it is from a foundational principle perspective, you will filter trust. Your trust filter will be up, where you won't trust it all the way. You will make sure you use your human mind to vet things through and make sure that you understand the source of information, but hold these companies accountable as well.
Yeah, I would add on to the point you were making. It is a shared responsibility. And while the technology is here, it's still in an infancy state. And I think that to the point Tanneasha was going, where it can go and the possibilities around it. And I think that's why you're seeing the White House wanting to be involved, understanding what's happening with AI. Because the truth is, there is a reality where there are bias factors, there are discrimination factors, there are children issues that you should be concerned about that are being built in these models, especially these open models. And while I appreciate where a number of companies similar to Microsoft are going with Copilot, I think we all have a responsibility in understanding these technologies and how they're being used. I think about just getting here, and I was in the airport, and the TSA now, I'm like, oh wow, I'd never seen this before. I'm going through the airport, and they were like, hey, you're able to opt out if your photo is being taken. I'm like, I never seen that before in the airport, so until I was traveling. But understand, while maybe it's just being used today, that facial recognition powered by biometrics then creates that next thing, generates a new thing. And so I think we just need to have awareness around, while it's still in the infancy phase, this technology is moving fast, and that we do have a shared responsibility to put governance, companies, the government, individuals, again, of how we're sharing information. I am highly concerned with so many things happening in 2024 that this does not become a year of hate speech. We've already seen the impact. I know a number of big tech companies are putting in efforts, putting in safeguards to try to prevent a number of fake news. So I think these are just things we need to have awareness around, and realizing that we too can have a voice. It's not happening to us.
Yeah, no, and there are a lot of regulations like requiring some of these big tech companies to either literally document how these algorithms work, making them publicly available. Like these big tech companies, or gatekeepers is what the regulators in Europe call them, they also have to hire auditors to come and audit those machine learning models to make sure that they're trained well, that the way that you described it to users and consumers, that's exactly how it's operating. There are new regulations that are going to require you to make sure you have like a full inventory, because a lot of these tech companies, they don't even know where all their machine learning models are. Like, I know that firsthand, right? So now they have to actually manage it like an asset, just like how you all work for companies where your IT department knows everyone that has a laptop. That's how you're going to actually have to start managing these models and making sure that they're secure, making sure that they're fully vetted before they're launched and released. So I know that I think we have 1 more minute, or are you guys kicking me out? What are you doing? No? Okay, good, thanks. Any other questions? Oh, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to think about the future relative to creation and training of these models. Okay, I'm from the aerospace industry, so I'm thinking about it not quite from the consumer standpoint, but from generative AI models that don't just create words and pictures, but can do real engineering. Yeah. And do you see the future as and companies have data that they're very concerned about keeping, because most of the data used to create aircraft and spacecraft is not in the public domain. So if I'm a company, I'm thinking about that, I want to create these models, am I going to put my data on top of an existing model and extend it? Or do I need to create my own proprietary model to keep my data private? How do I do that as I create these models to do engineering?
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think, so the first part of your question, generative AI is being used to code and to generate code and do programming today. And I've also seen where engineers are able to use generative AI to expedite the training of their models. So think about algorithms used to identify misinformation, disinformation. It usually takes about 6 months to train those types of models. Now you're using generative AI, it takes 3 days. So that's the type of efficiency that's happening on an engineering front, where it's just generating code and helping to train other models. I think this is an excellent question around the proprietary information you have. How do you keep that private and use generative AI? There will be, just like private cloud, public cloud. Remember when we first was introduced to the cloud, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, it's like, oh, I don't want my data out in the public cloud. You will be able to have your private version of these models that you can use in your own secure environment and train it. And the reason why I use the word sidekick, because Deloitte has their own internal Gen AI and it's called Sidekick. And I was like, oh, no one gets the joke because you're not at Deloitte. but you will be able to have your own proprietary model, license that in, and it'll be within your secure environment, and you use your proprietary schematics to train that. And then the awesome things that you'll be able to do outside of these images and just like soliloquies that's happening with Gen AI today, you can start just building digital twins of the aircrafts that you're thinking about. And you can then start thinking about, like, how can I use generative AI to simulate any type of safety issues? We just saw a plane had to, I won't name the airline, but a plane had to ascend quickly because the bolts flew off. Like, you will be able to use generative AI to start doing some of those simulations and identify risk, safety issues and risk beforehand. And that's why we think safety is also part of this trust by design concept. Awesome, but great question, thanks Todd. So I know that we're over time and I started late, but I really appreciate you all staying after. We're here, so feel free to come and chat with us, but definitely go to the rest of Deloitte sessions, but definitely contact us on LinkedIn. We're all on LinkedIn. We're happy to have conversations, and we have a piece in the Wall Street Journal on trust by design. We are releasing some more POVs on digital trust and how to think about that in the age of generative AI. And my colleague Stephen and I are here, and where we're helping engineers build like canonical databases of trusted code that you could just like use to ensure like the right safeguards are embedded in products. So if you have any questions of that sort, feel free to connect with us. Thank you.